Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. I am your host, Peter Dixon, and my very special guest today is Tihomir Kukolja. How am I going with that, Tihomir?
Excellent.
Pretty good, right?
Yeah.
And forgive me if I get it wrong. I actually really try hard to get names right because it's, what our parents called us. And it kind of is a bit of a flag for we humans as we traverse this life. So I try and get it right. I bet you've had a few people say it a variety of different ways in your time.
Yeah. Uh, when I lived in Australia and when I pastored in Melbourne, then to make it easy on people, then I had another name also. That was Thomas. For some reason, Thomas
Right.
was
Easier
my
to say.
choice,
Yes.
and it was
Yes.
easy to remember. But when it comes to my name, I have experienced all kinds of pronunciation. The one that I love the most is Tihomir Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola. Well, at least you've got a good sense of humor surrounding that.
Yeah.
Just a quick couple of announcements, Tihomir. We've got tomorrow at this time Bill Fritz. Bill has been very prolific on lots of Facebook groups, and I encourage everyone to join us tomorrow at this time, wherever you are on the globe, with Bill Fritz. And then we've got our special once a week gospel program with Hal Southwell this week, and he's going to be talking about the kingdom of God and worship, and I'm very much looking forward to that. So that's our kind of little tribal gathering for all those who want to gather once a week, and same time as now, not tomorrow, next day, and it's just a great time to look at the gospel minus any filters. Got some good guests coming up next week, but we'll leave that to promote later on. And I guess we've called today's program a non-event that became an SDA pillar. Now, I want to pause for a moment and just ponder, like literally right now in the United States, 180 years ago, it was October 22, and people were preparing for the return of Jesus. This William Miller prediction had got so many people excited, on board. And where I am now, it's October 23, but literally at this time frame that we're talking about, these people were getting ready. Some were getting on top of roofs and houses and barns. Some had ascension robes. Whether that's a myth or not, we can discuss later. But the thing is, many had sold their farms, properties. They'd put everything on the line for this. And Adventists call this date the Great Disappointment because, as we know, Jesus did not return. And I just want to pause for a moment to just really consider how sad that would have been for those folk when they awoke the next day. Right now, they would have been feeling, hearts filled with hope. And a few hours from now, their hopes were dashed. And from the ashes eventually arose the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And the three key founders were Ellen G. White, her husband James White, and Joseph Bates. So we're going to discuss a lot of things today, but our, I guess, theme that I want to dig into at the start because of the date was this a non-event that became an SDA pillar? Adventists would say, well, look, it wasn't a non-event. We just got the interpretation of the prophecy wrong. And we're going to talk about your journey from being a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, ordained pastor, to eventually the next chapter of your life. You were director of Renewing Our Minds Ministries. We're going to talk about that as well. And then we're going to talk about lots of other little things on the way. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation as we dig deep into some of these important topics, particularly with regard to Seventh-day Adventists, and also this concept of, why would God infuse as the very founding kind of starting point for the church, a message through William Miller and allow him to get it so wrong, the interpretation of it? Why wasn't he nudged in the right direction, that a new phase was about to begin or something like that? Why the return when the Bible explicitly teaches not to do that? And the other thing I want to lean into a little bit is, um, how long can we say the word imminent actually applies to this part of Adventism's kind of claim, that the Lord's return is imminent? How can we is 180 years, when we get 200 years, is it no longer advisable to use the word imminent? These are things we'll be discussing. So to kick it off, I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that you were born in Croatia, and I want you to tell us a little bit about your childhood, and some of your background, and then I want you to jump straight into this non-event that became an SDA pillar. Over to you. Thanks, Tihomir.
All right. Peter, it's a pleasure to be with you. I've been following your work for a while now, I can say this. Not that I've been faithfully every time watching you in real time. I did it as much as I could, depending on my own circumstances. And I'm glad to be here tonight. For me, it's tonight. Okay, for you, it's still the middle of the day. I live in Houston, Texas, with my wife Christine and my son Matthew. And I've been living here for about 15 years, 16 years up to now. I was born in Croatia. At that time, this was former Yugoslavia when I was born, and it was a time of socialism of a kind. It was not a rough kind of socialism like the one in Russia or under the umbrella of Russia. Nevertheless, it was a kind of more gentle form of socialism that we had when I was growing up. I grew up in a home of a pastor, church minister. He was the first generation of Adventists together with my mother, so I was the second one. And to understand the background where I'm coming from, most of the Adventists at that time, when my father was a young man, either former Catholics or Orthodox, depending where you lived. If you lived in Croatia, that was most likely you were coming from a Catholic family. So much of the culture, much of the, I would say, rigidness of what was present in the Catholic Church was just transmitted to a new environment, but yes, under the new set of beliefs. I think this is good to have in mind. And, my father belonged to that generation of ministers who was taking very seriously his work, very seriously. That was really number one thing in his life. I'm not taking this against him. I think he was a product of his own time.
And he was an Adventist pastor, you're saying?
He was an Adventist pastor, and he really took the calling very seriously. And at that time, that meant, for example, I remember very vividly those years when I was being brought up. It's not that the grace was not mentioned, that salvation through Jesus was not there, but there was something that is, I think many who are here listening are familiar with. There was this kind of atmosphere where the joy of salvation like this was taken away at the same time by very much heavily relying upon the authority of the writings of Ellen G. White. Right. Our devotionals in my home, and I don't think it was only the home of my father and mother, our devotionals were more about reading from the testimonies, and not so much from the Bible. From the Bible, yes, taking a verse here and there, but really then comes a paragraph or a chapter from the testimonies. And somehow from my early years, the two things I want to mention at this time, and this is that I always believed, I don't remember in my lifetime, and even as I was a child, that I was a person who didn't have a faith. I don't remember times that I was going through crisis and then I would say I was rebellious. I wouldn't believe anymore.
Right.
My crisis was about, I remember it vividly, even as a child, I never believed I would be saved.
Wow.
I never believed I thought others would make it. I thought all people who have lived long enough and who are so disadvantaged now from any fun in life, they are able to reach the standards which are being expected, but not me, who is full of life and full of expectations of life. That was I remember vividly those years of childhood, because those conditionals, like if, when you read the testimonies of Ellen G. White, there are all conditionals of if only the faithful would do this, of if only faithful would act like this. And this was, to me, it sounded like that these are such conditions that basically no one is reaching. No one is reaching, certainly not me. And the other thing that we were very impressed upon, and it was the expectance of Jesus Christ to come any moment.
Yes.
Any moment. I remember when there was a total eclipse, something, and everyone was expectant about that something is going to important to happen. I was 7, 8, 9 years of age, maybe even younger, and we were buying some of those dark glasses, very primitive at the time, expecting to be looking at this spectacle. And I was wondering, why is there such a fear around this kind of event? And I believe I asked my mother about this, and she says, son, this is because this is a sign that Jesus is coming soon, So I remember those kind of things, and I'm not remembering them as something I'm taking against my parents.
No.
I would say this was the culture of Adventism, and I was not the only one part of this culture. Growing up, at one hand, believing, taking faith seriously, and another hand, being upset with such a rigidness of my own faith, that what is expected for me, and also living in an atmosphere of not really believing that I will even have a time to grow up. And it messes you up a little bit. Maybe one of the reasons why when I came to the student years, it took me several years actually to work out what I want to do with myself.
Yeah.
Because I was expecting Jesus to come.
Yeah.
So these are and eventually then I ended up, story is very long. I ended up at Newell College in England. I started developing friendships with young people. That was unusual. Listen, this was very unusual, certainly for an Adventist at that time. I'm talking about, 70s, all right? That was an unusual thing, certainly in my culture, to be having a lots of relationship with young people from other church denominations. And I'm thinking about Baptists, for example, Pentecostals, and other evangelicals. But for some reason, I'm trying to explain to myself, from a very early age, I started kind of socializing with them to the point that I would even go to their retreats, even the youth meetings. I was at the same time very much faithful to my own church, but I also enjoyed their company. And when I look at myself now, there is no question that when it comes to my journey of faith, that those things did contribute or to the shaping of what I would say, who am I right now at this moment, Later on, when I became more active in society, whatever, most of the leaders of other denominations, and these were not the big denominations because Protestants and the others were minority and are still minority there, but most of the leaders of the Evangelska Crkva, as they call it, evangelical church, these are, I would call, moderate Pentecostals, Baptist Church, Church of Christ, Brethren, and so on. Most of those people then, and even now, the leaders of the churches are my personal friends. So I had this relationship developing at the same time of friendship with the people and leaders from the other faith. And then I ended up at Newell College doing theology, came back to former Yugoslavia. I needed to finish my military service. A few years later, I returned to Newell College, completed theology, and I'm just speeding it up so to come to our main subject. Then I worked in Croatia for a while as a media director for the church, as a pastor. This was in 1999, as a pastor to serve because there was a need at that time for a pastor who is going to pastor an ethnic church, a Croatian church, but who would also speak English, so that the church can use me also for other churches too. And that's exactly what happened. I was serving for 5 years or so as a pastor of the Croatian Seventh-day Church, St. Albans Church in Melbourne, and then also I was serving in one of the simply English-speaking churches in Melbourne. Then my marriage collapsed, and that totally turned my world upside down. And then I took the leave of absence. I'm not blaming anyone. I simply needed the time to reassess where I was and what I was doing. And then I decided I was going to move back to Croatia because I needed sometimes to be elsewhere. And then, and I will stop with this thing, I will stop it now in a minute. And then I was invited to join an interdenominational NGO by a good friend, Baptist minister, to join him and try to develop some new programs under the umbrella of his ministry. And without any special planning prior to this, because I was thinking this was all going to be very short lasting, this actually changed my life since then and up to now. I found myself leading not a big one, but very, I would say, influential ministry for leadership development and reconciliation called Renewing Our Minds in Southeast Europe. And I remarried soon. My wife, Christine, comes from the Presbyterian background. Her father is a retired Methodist minister. And we worked together. We lived in Croatia together. We lived in America together. She was helping me in the leadership of this reconciliation ministry. And what is important to say at this moment, because I think we will need this. This was and still is a non-denominational sort of interfaith ministry that deliberately works with the people, young people from different faiths, in the areas of leadership development and reconciliation. And in short, and I'm stopping now here, all of this, whether I liked it or not, served to shape my life. Step by step, nothing overnight, but shape and reshape my life to the point that I would say often to the students I was serving for many years, I would say it almost every year to them. I said, people, what I believed 20 years ago is not the same what I'm believing exactly now. And if the Lord gives me to live for another 20 years, I know that in 20 years, I will not believe exactly what I'm believing now. But I have one prayer, I have one request, and this is that I always remain to have Jesus in the center of wherever I am. So maybe that's enough for the introduction.
I love that. That's a great introduction. And I always enjoy getting to know people better on the show. And I've seen your comments quite often. That's why I invited you to come on the program, because you've been writing some very interesting replies and comments to various people inside the group. And that's a good thing for people just to be aware of. SDA Q&A is open to conservative Adventists, liberal Adventists, and a lot of people say, oh, you're just allowing only the former Adventists to have a voice. And then for a while, people were saying, "Oh, you're only allowing the liberal progressive to have a voice," and the conservatives people. My point is that I welcome. So if you feel you're not being represented and you're watching today, just contact me and come on the program. I'm not trying to present a bias. I have my own bias, of course, but my own thoughts and beliefs. So yeah, it's good to get to know someone a bit better and see where they're coming from. So it was kind of a slow change from this state of mind that really was in kind of this holding pattern, this end time loop. Jesus is coming any day. You go to Newbold and you're not even sure what you're going to study or do because you just haven't been leading to any kind of preparation because Jesus is coming back any minute. So if you've had this slow change to where you are now, was there some defining moments though, particularly with today's sort of starting topic about this October 22 investigative judgment, sanctuary, Christ not returning? Was there some key moments where you started to doubt that doctrine and it became, it went from being an event to a non-event? With such a significant Adventist doctrine as an Adventist pastor, surely there must have been some moments that stand out to you that you went, oh, hang on a second, this isn't adding up. And if that's what happened, can you share those moments? Oh, and before you do, Sir Nilo writes that he was at Newbold 93 to 96. Perhaps you met. Were you there during that time?
I think we missed each other because I was out of Newbold at the end of 89.
89, right.
Yeah.
Right. So Nilo, you're just too young.
That is an interesting question. When I go back analyzing my own life, when it comes to the point of the investigative judgment and 1844 and all of this, that was probably the very first thing that I started questioning. And in my very early age, I remember that when I was in 1978, going to Newbold for the first time, I already did not believe in the legitimacy of the investigative judgment.
Wow.
Now, what happened was this. I came to Newbold at the time when things were happening with Desmond Ford. And even prior to the Glacier View meetings, there was this period of some kind of, I would call it honeymoon, when it seems that, as you know, some of the Adventist media were open to Desmond Ford. So in the ministry magazine for ministry pastors, which did have a stage when it was pretty much open to other denominations too at that time, frequently there would be an article by Desmond Ford. Also, the library of Newbold College would be receiving different magazines. For example, the Present Truth and the Verdict, yeah, from Brisbane, yes,
Yeah.
was coming on a regular basis.
Wow.
You know, and
in the
I know
library.
The library. So these we are talking about those late 70s, and certainly when I was back in '84, still it continued like this.
Wow.
So at the same time, prior to Glacier View, the tapes were circulating around, cassette tapes, with debates that involved Desmond Ford and some other theologians. There would be usually at that time two of them. There was another guy with Desmond Ford on one side and another two on the other side. I'm forgetting the names, And this was like a spiritual food, not just for me, for many students, if my memory serves me right. We were sharing this. We were copying from each other those tapes. Well, we were listening with the expectancy. What was going to happen? How is this thing going to end? And I can still remember very vividly that there was this hope in the air. There was this hope in the air that finally Adventist Church was going to kind of purify its theology by coming forward with much clearer gospel than it has been doing before. I clearly remember that, and I'm not the only one who was at that time expecting that. And I know that we were, as the students, discussing about this very, very often, and what a disappointment it was when things turned completely different. But what I do remember at that time in Newell College, but I still remember also in the years early 80s, that there was, whether this was an official stance of the college, I can't remember, but there was a climate of bigger openness and I think freedom to speak and express yourself and exchange those ideas without any fear that someone might take it against you. So I remember that I was growing up at Newell, to put it like this, under those conditions. And those conditions, I would say, finalize my journey when it comes to the sanctuary. And this is believing that theologically, this doctrine cannot stand. It doesn't have legs to stand. That was my journey, you know. And I don't know how far you want me to go, but to me, one thing was very crucial at that time and ever since then, and this is the understanding of what the atonement actually is. You know, that
I want you to dig into those reasons, not just say
the atonement is not something that is happening recently in the heavenly places, but when we are talking about the atonement, completed atonement, the whole business was finished from the beginning to the end in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, without any strings attached, without anything to be left over for some later date. And when we read the book of Hebrews, to me at least, those statements are so clear when the writer says that once for all, repeats this, that this was all done once for all. So when Jesus died for us and when he was resurrected and returned to his Father, it was a done deal.
Yeah.
It was a done deal.
Yeah.
To me, this was speaking against the concepts of atonement as understood by the kind of Adventism, definitely, that's based on this Adventism of the early beginning. And mind you, it's not much different now. It just polished the vocabulary. It sounds more appealing and attractive, but in essence, it's still there. Jesus is still in the sanctuary, finishing the atonement.
Which begs the question: what was special? And they say, well, there was a special judgment. Well, how different is that judgment to the judgment that's spoken of in the Bible?
Like I don't know. I would like to know too.
Yeah,
I would like to know that, and all this business about Jesus. They don't speak anymore with this language. They're talking about phases of ministry, not entering, leaving the holy place, entering the most holy place. This has been muddied a little bit more, but in essence, when you read the statements of faith today, basically they're saying the same thing, just kind of sugar-coated. But all this business going from Jesus going from the holy place to the most holy place. In 1844 and closing himself to make it even worse. When we read in the Gospels that when Jesus died, the curtain between the holy place and the most holy place was torn, which means there are no rooms anymore. There are no separations anymore. It's open. It's open, not closed. We are not closing something in the most holy place. Now we have Jesus who is going into the most holy place. He closes himself. And then he starts counting and reading. And you don't know whether your name has come. That was my childhood, I remember. We don't know because my name might have already come and I don't know.
Yeah. And once it comes up, there's nothing you can do about
Tough luck.
Can I bring in a couple of comments? And look, tell me not to if you want to keep going on your thread, but sometimes it's good to bring in.
I need some time to think too.
So we've got Kirk Brower, and thanks for your involvement today there, Kurt. Investigative judgment is the opposite of the teaching of a finished atonement, yet a pillar of Adventism. And then Stephen Beagles, and Stephen, I can't bring it up unless you're in YouTube. I can't bring it onto the screen, but I can read it out. And Stephen is an Adventist, and he believes in the Adventist teaching of the sanctuary I'm pretty sure, and he says Jesus atoned for our sins once for all, but we are not in heaven yet. There is more work for him to do. And Adventists often say that, well, the atonement was at the cross, but there's still work to be done. But they're like two separate topics in some ways, but Adventists try and blend them together. Well, how would you answer that question, that answer that Stephen just did there, brought onto the table?
I think we need to go back to the very beginnings. I did send you some of my documents unfinished, which actually I worked on 30 years ago when I was a pastor in Melbourne. I found some time to do this, where I really wanted to chronologically see what was happening, and at the very beginning, and the church has never actually apologized for it. It said, no, we believe differently. At the very beginning, there was this belief that all our sins are coming. Jesus is coming, evaluating them. And basically, depending on the level of our sanctification, I know I'm simplifying now, but depending on the quality of our sanctification, we are being judged whether we are acceptable or not. And out of this comes this perpetual fear that we never knew whether we were saved. And even if you go today to the extremes of believing in the perfection of the last generation, it all starts from there, from Jesus sitting in the most holy place and basically checking on us whether our sanctification is good enough or not. Whether we, through our way we behave and are keeping the commandments, are actually vindicating God. And basically everything is turned upside down. There is no complete salvation. There is no assurance of salvation. You never know whether you are saved or not. You only know then when I don't know, when you appear at the judgment seat of God, when you hear the declaration, then you will know. And by then we all have to dread in one way or another. I know some are going to say that this is a caricature, but that's where everything is coming from. We know one thing, and this is that upon acceptance of Jesus by simple faith, awareness that I cannot make it, awareness that the sin, whatever it is such a thing that separates me from God, that the only key to this is, in some, I would say, mystical way, because I don't know how to explain it, is the work of Jesus. His life, death, and resurrection. And basically, in all humility, we need to accept it for myself.
And I think a lot of gospel Adventists get to that point. And I've noticed this. There's like at the crossroads or the Y, the fork in the road, is Adventists that are gospel Adventists and the more heritage Adventists. They gather at this point and they agree that it's through the working of Jesus that we are changed. And the gospel Adventist doesn't then really go out on the road one way saying, and I think, and jettisoning the concept that the heritage Adventist welcomes and embraces, is that you're changed through Jesus, but it's important that transformation that occurs because of Jesus does take place, or you won't get to heaven. Whereas to the gospel Adventists, it's the transformation that occurs, and it's more of a benefit to life. It's not a salvific thing. I'm not explaining myself very well, but they often meet at that point and don't fully understand why they disagree. But it's clear to me. I remember Dennis Priebe. He's not someone I agree with his thoughts, but he clarifies, I think, the true heritage Adventist view that Jesus works in you. You therefore lead a sinless life, which is important for the other angels and the planets and the people in the other planets to see this cleansed life, this life that is sinless, And then comes the end of time. This is Dennis Preby explaining what I've read many times in Great Controversy. Then comes the time of trouble. And then just before Jesus returns, Jesus is defending these people to God. Look what they've done. They're not sinning. And God says, yes, they are sealed. And Dennis Preby describes, as does Ellen White in Great Controversy, that the job is still not quite finished. They've been sealed to do one last job, and that's to vindicate God. And this is where we get all these feelings when we're growing up. We're just not too sure if we're saved, even though we don't fully understand this very intricate, nuanced teaching that is at the heart of Adventism. So this special sealed team now, Jesus removes his mediation. They are still on the planet, and that now they must live sinless on their own merits. Yes, they've already been chosen and made righteous, but now they need to take this thing. So we come to the fork in the road, and gospel Adventists meander off into the bushes and live their gospel Adventism. You know, they have to kind of make up a few things, let go of a few things. And then the other Adventism that goes along the heritage line, this path towards what I think is truly found in the Great Controversy, and it gets very complicated and nuanced and almost too difficult for even the more conservative Adventists to understand. And so it becomes this very unclear doctrine. But essentially, it's Jesus will work through you. You will therefore live a sinless life. You will still be judged. If you're found that you are righteous, you will be given the seal. You have one more job to do, time of trouble, live sinless. Jesus is gone as a mediator. Vindicate God, prove Satan's claim wrong, then Jesus will come. And it's not biblical.
Do you know what I've found? That whenever we take away the simplicity of the gospel, and I think the gospel is powerful, but it is, I mean, our God is in business of saving us, not complicating the paths of salvation.
Exactly, yeah.
It is not that he's saving us through some kind of Gnosticism where we need to know all the kind of tunnels of salvation and where the junctions are taking place till you grow insane completely. What I have found is whenever we or whoever abandons the simplicity of the gospel, then we find ourselves in this situation where we are building artificial constructions. We are building a tower in the sky that doesn't have any foundation, but it has a beautiful, I don't know, image and the windows and the doors and I don't know what, but all of this stands on nothing.
Yeah.
But because simplicity of the gospel has been abandoned, and because in the process you are coming to kind of pitfalls which one cannot really explain, then comes a new element, then comes this, and then comes this, and building this, and this, and that, and this, and this, and then we call it a beautiful building, beautiful thing. But just because we have artificially created this fantasy building, you know,
this edifice. Well, I think even when
can I just say before I not forget?
Go
Sanctification is important. Maybe we can touch this also a little bit. Sanctification is important, but it is not what our traditional historic, I don't know how we call them, Adventists want to present, because we need to analyze this. And I don't want to be harsh. I'm just generalizing, but still I will say it. At a populist level, definitely. When Adventists talk about sanctification, what are they talking about? Are they talking about feeding the hungry, going to those who are in prisons to visit them, being peace builders? And I can go on and on like this. Or do they have one or two things in mind and always? And this is the fourth commandment. We are always being brought this, that when we are in Jesus, then Jesus helps us to live righteously. But it always ends up in Revelation those who believe or have Jesus and keep the commandments of God, and the mind slips immediately. This must be 10 commandments.
Yeah.
And then mind goes a next step. It never thinks about the other 9 commandments, but it always thinks about the Sabbath day.
Yes.
And this is the fulfillment of the holiness in the minds of many Adventists. Something is wrong with that.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Something is wrong with that.
Yeah.
Holiness is important. Sanctification is important. The Bible says that without those, no one is going to see God. But we need to place them in the right perspective, and always being aware that even when we walk the path of holiness and sanctification, it's still a filthy rag.
Yeah.
Still incomplete. It is like a little child seeing his father in his workshop building something, and he wants to copy his father, and then he takes a hammer and start building a little house, whatever, and shows to the father, and the father is so impressed and said, "Beautiful, my son. It looks almost like my work, but it is not. When you would really take a picture of this, what my child has built, it's all crooked, going left and right. But it's accepted because of the father." We need to remember that.
Yeah, very good.
We are called to the life of holiness, but we are never on pair with Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a humbling thought.
Yeah.
And that we accept it like this.
Yeah. That's a good thought and some good analogies in there. And often when I try and explain what this final teaching of Adventism is, that Heritage Adventists and Gospel Adventists don't truly want to explore, I'm the one that comes across as, wow, he's not making much sense. And you can see me even floundering as I explain it, because it is such a convoluted little add-on thing here and there. So anyone trying to fully understand it sounds like they're mentally incapacitated. And so a lot of them don't even go there. I've had people on the show that claim to be absolute specialists in the IJ and the sanctuary doctrine, and I take them down this last little path of Jesus is not a mediator, the sealing, they've been approved, but they have still one more job, and even they can't fully understand it. And it's only because I've read The Great Controversy 6 times this year that I'm piecing together what that teaching is. And look, I wouldn't rest my brain into that into that zone, other than I'm trying to show how complicated it is. But then as you suddenly, breathe into the actual simple but deep and profound gospel, it's like you're getting into a hot bath, and it's makes sense. And so what do you I guess what I'm trying to tease out of your thinking there is, when you come across this confusion that Adventists have, the Gospel Adventist goes, "Oh, too much. I'm just going to, enjoy Happy Sabbath and the culture and my understanding of it." And then even the conservatives are not fully grasping this kind of deeper teaching. What do you say to Adventists when they're in that milieu? Do you say, "Look, yeah"? Do you feel a responsibility to kind of alert them to the confusion? Or do you say, "Hey, no, go for it. It's your choice"? Of course it is at the end of the day.
Well,
but is there value in doing what we're doing today, dissecting it, analyzing it, perhaps helping people grasp that it might be a little bit cray-cray? Is there value in that?
I believe that there is a value, but personally, in my case, it's like what you are doing that attracted me to speak about this. But really, I have been for more than 20 years in different spheres where those things did not matter to me anymore.
Yes.
When I say those things, I don't mean the gospel. I mean this artificial constructions of a beautiful building, which is called a sanctuary service. I've been out of this. and I've really been enjoying, to be honest, because I was more on not on a path of believing in social gospel, but on a line of applying the gospel at a social level,
Yeah.
And my speaking and my work with young people has been in this area.
Area.
So
Yeah.
in my work where I've been working, I never spoke on the sanctuary. I never
Yeah.
spoke on any of this. And I didn't want to speak about this, but it is important. The only thing is, and I know some of my friends who might be listening to me might be even disappointed to say, the history up to now is telling us that it's not of much help. I don't know. I don't want to be negative. I have my ideas. Why? To give you one, I'm not going to even give the names of the churches, because probably after this meeting, some of them are not going to invite me to preach anymore. But the other day, a friend of mine who is a Pentecostal, I call him moderate Pentecostal, because you have those who are really falling on the floor, but then you have those who are more moderate in their approach. He says, I listened to your sermon that you preached in a so-and-so Adventist church not a long time ago. And I think you were trying to tell them something.
Interesting.
And I was. But you need to be wise how you're doing it. And I said, I was trying. But whether they understood what I was saying, I'm not sure. Because what I'm seeing in some of the churches that I am familiar with, wonderful people, good people, you stand behind the pulpit and you try to unveil the gospel to them. And you get at the back of the door, and then one by one, except few who really understand what you are doing, they come to you and say, Pastor, this is so wonderful. This is so refreshing. We haven't heard like this anything for a long time. But those same people next Sabbath, when the most radical fanatic comes and preaches, they would be just as enthusiastic about his message. And I'm not saying to be cynical towards them.
No,
I'm just saying that the confusion of the system is so big.
Yes.
That most of the people do not simply know. They sense something, but they cannot define it, except a few. How can you lift up the Jesus on one occasion?
You're almost saying that
there comes this person
impossible.
who I don't know, simply the gospel is killed in the sermon. And people as enthusiastic. Yeah, we really have to work harder. We have to be ready. We need to, yes. We need to, do more.
It's funny, like the gospel Adventists, when I was an Adventist, I would have been a gospel Adventist, progressive Adventist, and I was encouraging people to stay, and the people above me were saying, hey, it's changing, stay. But now that I've left and I'm talking about the things that I've seen and have kind of blown my mind a bit about what Adventism actually is, they're now saying, hey, it'll never change. What are you wasting your breath on? I'm like, you guys were telling me it was changing. Now you're saying it can't be changed. There's just some kind of things that don't add up at every point with Adventism. You'll say one thing and it's defended, and then you say what they're saying and they will take a different stance. It's like a debater that's just given a topic and they'll support it, whatever it is. But I think I think what I'm trying to do with SDAQ&A is not change people's minds, but normalize the idea of asking questions and taking other positions, thinking for yourself, drawing conclusions, using your own mind. And I've also noticed that I would probably get on average 2 or 3 messages a month saying, hey, I'm some of the stuff that you've said, and I've been watching other programs, Academy Apologia and Test the Prophet and Answering Adventism. And there's a lot of kind of social media work going on at the moment that has made me think, and I'm leaving the Adventist church. I'm not encouraging people to leave, but it is happening because of shows like this. So another thing I'm hoping to do is help to and I think Rochelle just wrote an interesting thing. And hi, Rochelle. She's put it's a lot of help to those of us who want the truth. And a lot of people who leave don't have anything or place to go, and they're trying to make sense of what just happened. So I think there is value in doing what we do and discussing these kinds of topics. Can I ask you a question a little bit off topic? What we're talking about at the moment, but it's one that you and I discussed, and it's pertinent to what we're just saying now. A lot of Adventists, if they if they leave the Adventist church, they find it quite traumatic. Whereas if a Baptist is in town here in Cooranbong and they move up to the Sunshine Coast and they don't quite like the Baptist church so much that they're attending there, and they like the Uniting Church or the Anglican Church, or there's no real stigma about it. But why would you suggest that leaving the SDA Church can be seen as such a traumatic experience for many former Adventists, while not so much for many from other denominations?
Yeah, you're right. For example, the church that I am attending with my family, it is an evangelical Presbyterian church, not heavy on predestination, because I don't believe in predestination the way that classically it's being presented at all. It's a very good church. But, this church is full of people, former Baptists, former Lutherans, former Methodists, even former Catholics, who have transitioned from their churches to this church painlessly, and not a big deal, almost like as if you are going from one local church to another, moving.
Yeah.
And it was not a big deal. It was not traumatizing at all. Why it is so traumatic for so many Adventists who are leaving the church it's for, I would say, for this reason. Many Adventists, and again, this is the fruit of the system worked into our system for almost 2 centuries. A typical Adventist that cannot make a distinction between the truth as a concept and the person of Jesus. And what I mean is this. Within Adventism, people talk about the truth. We have the truth. We have the truth. So basically, what makes me a believer, born-again believer, Christian, is the concepts, the doctrines, the system theological that Adventism has, and do I believe in that system from the beginning to the last point? And Jesus happened to be one of the points in the line.
Yeah.
He's not a separate thing. He's not something that everything I believe ought to be subjected to. But he is one of the doctrines. He is one or two fundamental beliefs. The rest is all the others and distinctives and whatever it is.
Yeah,
and
true.
basically, if you are to be a faithful Adventist, you have to believe in all of them. So when an Adventist comes into crisis for whichever reason, whether personal reason, whether disappointment with the church, whatever reasons, typical Adventist doesn't know where to go. Because while this is not all right, everything else is still worse in the mind of an average Adventist. Everything.
Right.
If what I believed so far is not as truthful, then how can I expect from the other churches to offer me more truth than what I've already known? And then they end up in a limbo. Many of them in a limbo, nowhere. They are not in the church, and they don't join any other one because they're not confident. They're not comfortable to join anything else.
Yes.
That's how I see why it is so painful. It is so painful because subconsciously, typical Adventist, even when he or she leaves the church, still subconsciously believes that he or she is leaving the best church.
Yeah.
But for some reason, it's not functional, and I can't be part of this anymore.
Yes.
But there is nothing else to match that church.
That's a really good way of looking at it. Very, very good point.
I think this is one of the reasons why. And I don't think it happens with everyone. I know people who have transitioned somewhere else without too much of a hustle, but generally speaking, this is what happens with why an Adventist cannot simply move on somewhere else, while maybe other Christians, and I know traditional Adventists will say, yeah, of course you can start like this, you can say something like this, but those other churches are all Babylon or whatever it is, and they they are believing this or that and that and that, but that's the reason. There's the reason.
Yeah. And I think also Adventists aren't trained in thinking about opposing views and taking on board polemic ideas. And in fact, it's discouraged. I don't know if you read about that pastor recently, that he spoke on a podcast. Christopher Mindanao is his name, and he said on the podcast that he didn't believe that he believed the seal of God was the Holy Spirit and not the Sabbath, and he believed that the Sunday law wasn't the mark of the beast, or Sunday keepers keeping Sunday wasn't the sign of the mark of the beast. Now, he essentially had to leave his job because of that. He was taken into the office and had to explain his beliefs, and he left the Adventist church he didn't leave the church, but he left his pastoral role. So they're not even having the ability to go, well, this is not making sense. They can't even begin to explore other options because their mindset is not to even look at different ideas. They just go, like you say, this one's not quite working, but everything else is going to be worse than this, so I might as well stay here. And they tend to just hobble along for the rest of their lives, never fully embracing the gospel. And that can sound a little bit arrogant, like a higher ground to say, well, you guys aren't understanding the real Jesus. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, you need to clarify a little bit more.
I mean, in a little bit of what we're saying, we're kind of implying that they don't understand the gospel, but those of us who have left do have a better grasp of it. For me, I'm not saying I have a better understanding. In fact, I'm making no claims. All I'm noticing is that when I left, my brain stopped the chatter, and I rested into a much easier understanding of the gospel. So I don't feel like I'm saying, hey, I've got a better, more clear path, but it can, what I'm saying is, for the former Adventists talking to the Adventists, it can sound like they're being a bit holier than thou. Have you pondered that kind of concept?
I don't know how. I don't know how this works. I know how those things work in concretely my case, but I don't know whether this is related to this. I don't want to miss your point, so you can bring me back. Is that I do believe that in the Adventist church there are people who do understand the gospel and who are still within the system. The problem is I do believe, I don't want to off the track and forget what I want to really say. For example, going back to the years when Newbold, around Desmond Ford and immediately afterwards, I know how many of the young students who are being trained to become ministers were so excited about the gospel. Definitely what Desmond Ford brought at the time for the Adventist setting, that was the purest gospel that the church has known, and has simple gambled the whole opportunity. And I know what an enthusiasm this has created in the lives of so many of those young people. But I also know this, and I was thinking, I will put it like this. Several of my colleagues from, say, former Yugoslavia at that time, I know because we were conversing together. We were going to Desmond Ford's meetings, which were organized. They couldn't be organized at Newbold. This was we are now talking about 84, 85. So they would organize them in a nearby town, Reading, and you had to see how many students and professors would come there. No one was talking in Newell about this, but we all knew that this was happening. And I know my friends, even from former Yugoslavia at that time, how enthusiastic we were. But not all of them remained with such a fire. When they got back, when they got to work, when they started pastoring, the fire was burned. They became faithful followers of the system. And the longer they are, the less you resist, because you're looking towards your retirement and so on. That's really sad, Did I forget what they learned? I don't think so. But I also know that there are others who are under the system who do know the gospel, and they would say this, but still, we have to accept one thing, that the cultural, that's not only for Adventism, it's the same. You can talk about any denomination, I would say. We've been speaking about Catholics against them and how their tradition, and they've created tradition and follow tradition. This all happens with all of us, and certainly with the Adventism. Very quickly, a culture was created. And this culture is so strong, it has grip over you. It has over you so strong, you are not even aware of this. You don't even aware of this. And basically, this has it on you so that you do have people who understand the gospel. They know that the Sabbath is not saving them. They know that it is the finished work of Jesus completely. They know that nothing happened in 1844, because I talked with some of them.
Yeah.
But they would not leave the system.
No. And I guess I'm referring, like, it's ironic that if you leave the Adventist church and you say to the Adventist church, I'll just bring up something Rick just wrote, Adventism has developed way too many distractions from the gospel. And if you if you leave the church and you say to those in the church, so this almost has got nothing to do with those that have understood the gospel in the church. Yes, there are many that have grasped the gospel. I'm talking about a collectively speaking, people who leave the Adventist church and suggest that Adventists don't fully understand the gospel. And as Rick just said, that it's developed way too many distractions from the gospel. The irony is that the Adventists that you're saying that to go, well, that's not my experience. How come you've got a higher moral ground? How come you feel so that you can put me down? And the irony is that they will do that to the Catholics and say that their path is wrong. And so it's a human thing. We all do that. But I guess I'm trying to say is if you're someone that feels like you've grasped something different about the gospel, and that the Adventist collective teaching and movement isn't teaching that and is in fact anti-gospel, how can you ensure that you can share this knowledge with people without coming across as if you're somehow better than other people, which of course no one is anyway?
Yeah,
I'll ask it as a question. If people said to you, why are you telling me that I don't have the gospel? What makes you able to claim that you understand the gospel better than me?
Yeah, I have to be honest and say, since I've been working outside of the Adventist parameters for more than 20 years, I would be very vulnerable. I'm not finding myself that I have to do that and be opening the eyes individually. I know only that my father, he was concerned about my salvation up to the last day of his life. He was 94.
Wow.
94 when he died. And he was concerned for my salvation because he could not accept that within this environment where I was working with so many other Christians, Baptists, Pentecostals, others, even Catholics, and even Muslims, and so on. He could not, he could not accept, he could not understand how he would be happier if I stayed within the church and was there a doorkeeper somewhere.
Yes,
the rest of my life.
Yeah.
That where I was. Doesn't matter the position, that I was actually leading a very interesting movement, whatever it is. And I will tell you, I would tell him, I understand that you are concerned, but believe me, that's how I would comfort him, because when it comes to someone who's 94, you cannot reform those people.
No,
and
no.
I was comforted by this, that as long as he calls upon the name of Jesus, that he's all right. But, I told him, I don't want you to be worried about me, because you and I, we still believe in the same Jesus. That's how I would comfort him, And when I would try to maybe test him a little bit here and there, and then he would say, like, but I know that at the end of the day, it's only because of Jesus, not because of me,
Yeah.
So this is the thing, but
I guess
maybe I'm
he's
not
so
dodging your
no,
question.
no,
I'm
no,
not
no. It's
dodging your question.
I
I'm
can
just honest that,
I can just see how it hasn't been relevant to you. And I'm talking, I guess, to a lot of people that are viewing the show and are part of this kind of movement at the moment that are trying to shine a light on some of the flaws of Adventism, not to tear it down, but to say, hey, there's something a bit better over here. It can sound a bit pious, but the response I've gotten is very rarely people saying, oh, so you think you've got a better way than me. They tend to think that their way is so right that they feel sorry for me, that, oh, you've left, you're going to be lost and this kind of thing. I'll change gear a bit. Kurt Brower has written over 7 million words of Ellen G. White. Where do you start to find the gospel? Of course, it's a muddled mess to wade through, and it mostly leads back to the law and not to Christ. And like you say, some people, many people in the Adventist church find the gospel and the true gospel. I'm speaking collectively, and I think he is too. This was an interesting point that Andy Mack made. I learned Advent, and she's kind of on a path out at the moment. I learned Adventism via osmosis, and before I can get it out of my being, I have to bring those SDA tendencies to my conscious mind so I can unlearn before I can learn the truth. And I know a lot of people that watch the show are experiencing that. They can't take, and people say, oh, why are you still involved with Adventism? If you've walked away, walk away. No, sometimes you have to have to immerse yourself in what happened, what went on, what did I just go through, and to talk about it, analyze it. For some people, and it really helps. She adds, even using the word truth gives me a PTSD response. I'm just reading a few comments and then we'll get back on track there. LGT has big money, and what drives the building of huge new buildings? I'm often surprised, when progressive Adventists say, how on earth do people in the Adventist church take on this perspective of last generation theology? How can it happen? I would say Adventism is marinated in it. All of the earlier visions of Ellen White that didn't come true are conditional, and she says, if you'd been a better church, Christ would have returned by now. That's last generation theology. And Kurt writes, Peter, that's part of the reason what you're doing is important. You ask questions, but in the SDA system, asking questions in many places about many topics is taboo. And that's what I just mentioned about Christopher. Did you hear that case where he was on the podcast, he said he believed the seal of God is the Holy Spirit, which is a Protestant view. And he said that Sunday isn't the mark of the beast. Next minute he's out. Did you hear about that one at all?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that case.
You heard about Rein de Bruinsma, though, where he was
I actually listened to his presentation.
Because I want to ask you about that next. So just start percolating on that. This idea that Kurt just raised, that it's taboo to even ask these questions, and that weakens a person's mind if you can't ask questions. And Rochelle adds, because it's the system of Adventism that saves you, not Jesus. They'd never come out and say that, but it's ingrained into you from a young age, and people who leave are immediately railed against. And I'm going to do a whole show soon on how they are railed against in very subtle ad hominem attacks. Are there any other comments you can see? There are so many there that have caught your attention.
Well, I was listening so
You
carefully.
were being very well behaved. I said to you before the show, it's best not to look at the comments.
Yeah, and I was
usually
listening to what you advised
yes,
me.
I appreciate that, because they can be they're very good, but sometimes they can be, you can go down different rabbit holes, which is kind of good. Yes, I want to chat about your thoughts on the Reinder Bruinsma episode recently. And for those that don't know, can you unpack a little bit about what happened and what your thoughts are on it?
Can I ask you maybe to just hold this question for a moment, because there is one thing on my mind.
You go for that. I've made a note here. I'll come back to that. You tell me when you're ready, and I'll come back to that one.
There was something that you said, I think, a few moments ago that kind of made me think. Something to do with that overall, when it comes to the system, that adventism doesn't know the gospel or doesn't have a gospel, something along those lines. The question, why is this so? Not that adventism doesn't speak with a language of the gospel and these kind of things, but you can speak about the gospel, but you can mean it, you can take it to be something completely different. Throughout the history of adventism, there have been moments from the very beginning. First, we started with 1844. Adventism starts on a wrong foot, on a wrong foot. And it creates a theology out of this, that makes it to be a distinctive thing from the other people who are waiting for Jesus to come, but they simply got disappointed, and that was the end of it. Adventism creates a system out of this. It's like a country that goes to war and loses the war, and then creates a story about the victory, and everything becomes at the end, no, they have won that war. So it was with the adventism like this. Here we have this 1844 great disappointment. First of all, people had the same Bible at that time, and they knew that it was a wrong thing and very dangerous thing to start calculating and setting the dates. That was not a new thing. That was in the Bible there, and Protestant believers at that time knew it too. So they got carried away. And I'm not taking it against them, but I think the natural response to this situation should have been that people should have repented from this and said, Lord, we are sorry. We made a mistake. We really got carried away.
Yeah.
We love you. We believe in you. We should not have done this. Please put us back on a track.
Yes.
Well, a group of people didn't do this. They simply say, oh, we just got some facts wrong. We were basically right, but we got something wrong. So everything starts on a bad footing. And then comes a build-up of teachings. Jesus is not yet here, but he's going to come next year. There is going, the primitive form of the investigative judgment and all of this, the shut the door before that. Or we who are here, who were alive at that time, who accepted the message, we are saved, but no one else. So no one else can be saved. Now time is passing, and things are changing. You can't, it is not holding the water. So then it has to change. It has to be more liberated. And you have the whole evolution. In my document that I shared with you, I have stated the progression of this evolution from, the closed door theory, midnight cry, and then how it developed into investigative judgment and all of this business, and how then over the years it became polished, not changed, only polished, only rephrased, only to make it more appealing, attractive, more neutral, but still holding the same essential things.
Very true.
So through this process, there were people who saw something was wrong.
Yeah.
And there were a number of opportunities for the gospel to shine through.
Mm.
Every time it was crushed. Every time it was crushed.
Yeah.
And then we have a point in the late 70s, with the Desmond Ford, probably the brightest when it comes to the gospel, the brightest moment in the history of this church.
Wow.
Hopes were raised, and
Yeah.
then this was crushed.
Yes.
And what comes after that? Comes a vacuum. A new generation of Adventists grew up who are clueless about what happened there, about Desmond Ford, about the hope of the gospel to shine through. They're clueless. They're being brought up in a kind of watered down situation with not a clear preaching of the gospel. And in the same setting, then you have a development of diversity under the umbrella of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, from the very radically conservative, historic, however you want to call Adventists, to, let's call it on the other end, progressive Adventists, who appear to be liberal and welcoming and embracing, and anything in between. And I'm going to say something that might sound radical, but none of these groups has the gospel.
Wow.
None of them, because the gospel has been crushed in the
Wow.
late 70s, and nothing has replaced that attempt that Desmond Ford tried to bring forth into the church. Nothing, to my knowledge, nothing has. Yes, you have individually pastor here and pastor there. You might have maybe somewhere a conference that is more open, this and that, but there is no a systematic attempt to deliver the gospel into the church and to refresh the Adventist teaching with the gospel wherever it takes us from there.
Yes, that's
this is,
such a
in
good
my
point.
understanding, this is what is wrong. And I know some are going to not forgive me that I said that none of those groups, from the radical right to the radical left, or whatever it is, and in between, have a gospel. Because why I'm saying this, even when you talk about, as far as I can say, the progressives, in so many areas, they are so advanced. They want women to be pastors, and that's how it should be. They want the other things. But they are peddling when it comes to the gospel. There is no clarity of the preaching and teaching of the finished work of Christ. And that everything, Christology, it must be the center, and the healthy Christology. Everything else has to revolve around this. Everything else has to come out of this, not other things to be informing the Christology, as it is the case.
So true. Angela Lima just writes, you speak the truth. I agree with you. Rick writes, a new generation is going to carry Des's torch. It is my prayer to be one of those who carry it. One of the reasons in lockdown that I began season 2 focusing on Glacier View and Des Ford, it wasn't my motivation, but it became apparent to me that I could never be one of these people carrying that torch to find this gem. But I've spent 3.5 years trying to find this gem within Adventism, this little light that Des Ford lit. I've cajoled, I've motivated, I've stirred the pot, I've poked the beast of these good people that followed Des and grasped this thing, only to find that in recent months they are very annoyed at me for trying to get them to do something about it, to get organized, to get networked, to systematize their approach, because I can't do it. But I've hoped to kind of motivate it as a little side, kind of not a project, but a side thing that I've noticed percolating. And it's discouraging to see, and I love how you've said it, no one has got it. That is so true. And it's discouraging to see that after 44 years of the Glacier View, since Glacier View, that there is, I've had top level leaders, literally GC level leaders in town, ask me to have lunch with them maybe 2 years ago, saying that they are trying to do it. And when I ask them about it, nothing's happened. And then when you hear of people like Christopher Mindanao and Rain de Barisma totally being unable to inspire such a movement, and when the scholars and academics remain fairly silent and speaking only in their safe Sabbath schools, I'm coming to the point, Tihomir, where I don't think it's going to happen. And I hate, like Rick's one of my great friends, I hate seeing his desire potentially being dashed. Do you think there is hope in this kind of gospel Adventism, this Des Ford inspired kind of movement, getting any kind of traction? Do you see hope in that? Or, as you say, you've been out of it for 20 years and focusing on other gospel-related matters and ministries. Because we don't want to say to people, give up. I know there's a lot of people watching today that want to light the Des Ford torch and carry it brightly. But I fear that as soon as they speak up publicly about it, they're going to be suppressed, ostracized, kicked out, called into the conference office and told off. What are your thoughts on that?
Do you know why I'm not optimistic? And I would like to be wrong, okay? I would gladly repent from what I'm going to say upon seeing a change. When I was pastoring in Melbourne, what was this? This was the late 90s, okay? Early this century. Even then, I had a little bit of hope, and I'll tell you why, because I'm not going to bring any names because I don't want anyone to go against me in this case. What I liked at that time, I cannot speak for the Victorian Conference now. I'm not in touch with them, so I don't know. But at that time, I found that the Victorian Conference, the setup of the Victorian Conference, was very favorable towards the gospel. I'll explain why. For example, we pastors in the Victorian Conference at that time, we knew each other where we were standing exactly for each other. And we were approximately half, which I would call gospel Adventist, and the half very traditional. Since I was pastoring two churches, I was always making sure that for every alternative Sabbath, I have a visiting pastor to preach. And as much as it was in my power, I was always looking to choose one of those pastors from what I would consider evangelical Adventist side, because I wanted that kind of message to be preached in my church. I never wanted to invite any of those historic, conservative, however we call them, because I didn't want that stuff. I myself, I can say it now, I wouldn't say it maybe before. If someone will count my sermons in my personal ministry, I never quoted Ellen G. White. Maybe once for political reasons, gentle political reasons. I never quoted Ellen G. White. I did not want to uplift her. I wanted to uplift the gospel. Now, people in the church felt liberated. They would not be able to even understand why, but I know what they were telling me. But there was a group, and interestingly enough, none of those 4 or 5 were the actual members of our church, but they used to come to our church. And I knew that whenever they were coming and when I would be preaching, there is going to be a trouble. And especially one of them, he would sit in the middle of a church, and then he would complain all the time. And in the middle of a sermon, he would stand up in a sign of a protest, and he would walk out of the church. I always knew that this was going to happen. So there were not many, just a few of those people. And here I'm coming to my moment of something looking promises. One day, the president of the conference invited me, and he put on a table a bunch of letters that this concerned brethren were writing how I'm chipping away, how I'm undermining the Adventist theology and all of these kind of things. I was never deliberately, I never used the word or anything that one could say, you are doing it. But those guys did understood what I was doing, because they knew what they believed or what they didn't believe, because they were on a completely different side. And what was encouraging to me, that we both read through those letters, and we even had a good laugh. And then he gives me this bunch of letters and says, now do whatever you want with this. You can keep them as a souvenir. I am taking this as an illustration because it represented the spirit of the time. I could have been told off.
No.
Some people
they were offering behind the scenes a hope.
Yeah.
It was a carrot that turns out to have been a false hope.
And then this was a time when there were those concerned brethren left and right. There were firm foundation, amazing this, amazing that, and I don't know. I've forgotten all of those names.
The Remnant
and I knew
Herald.
that.
The Remnant
and I knew
Herald.
that we had one or two church members who would go to their meetings. They would have once a month, or I don't know how often, and they would be sent back to evangelize in their local churches, So I would have thought that since then and up to now, things should have become better. That those elements, very radically right or whatever, conservative, there will be less of those. But this is not the case. The problem is that the domineering stream and power, the most populist one, and I'm not talking now at the level of local church, globally, are those forces who want to keep church stagnant and going back.
They're the dominant ones now.
To protect the system, to make sure that system operates, that it doesn't break.
And it's been like that since Canwright.
Yeah, but this is why I am not sure, because I am not seeing a progress.
No,
I'm not seeing less problems than I had 25 years ago.
Yes.
I see them more.
Yes.
And I see the level of popularity of those
leaders.
I mean, Bachelor is a moderate what kind of people exist there, The popularity of those popular evangelists within the Adventist Church or so on, that somehow are loved by our administration and supported because they guarantee the maintenance of the system. They have not become weaker. They have become more stronger.
Exactly.
And, we can, I have friends who said, listen, that's not the real situation. That's not the real Adventism. Well, to me, the populist Adventism is the real one, because it is the most effective.
Yes.
It is the most effective. True. That's the real. I don't care what the book says. I don't care that Adventist intellectuals, scholars are somewhere else, and many of them are, but they are not making a difference when it comes to the global church.
Here.
Those who make the difference is this middle that is breaking and not letting things go up.
Yeah.
And everything that is right, even more conservative, even more radical.
Yeah.
These are those who are shaping the populist mind of the Adventist. And I will give you just one simple illustration.
Yeah.
When you see on YouTube people who are trying to break with some light into the situation with their programs, if you have 400, 500, occasionally 1,000 visiting you, you are lucky. But when you have those radical people who are going to extremes, who are going to all kinds of Adventist conspirators, they get 20, 30,000, 40,000 following. To me, this is very indicative.
Yeah, I know. Look, I'm not a negative person. I'm a default. I'm not Pollyanna, but I'm a default. Get up, dust myself off, keep going. I didn't leave the Adventist Church till I was 54, 55. I stayed and encouraged people to stay. I helped this notion of this hope of changing theology, of changing dynamics with regard to more accepting of people where they were at. But I must say that I've gone even in the last 6 months from saying, Let's find this gem of Adventism. Let me do everything I can. I've spoken about Des Ford in over 300 interviews, I'm sure. You know, he gets a mention in every one of my interviews. I cherish his 1979, October 27 forum meeting, the 1 hour of power there that took the world by storm. But I'm coming to a point, and what you've said there is just totally lit fires in my brain of confirmation and validating what I've been thinking, is that the death of this potential hope that Des Ford brought, it's just in little embers, and I don't think it can take hold. And I feel terrible saying that to a lot of my friends that are watching, who are, you know, gospel Adventists. They yearn to see this message take light within Adventism. And I don't want to be negative or discouraging, but I just feel that within Adventism, it cannot occur. It's had plenty of opportunity since its beginnings. And one after another has fallen and fallen and fallen. I would love someone, like you, I would be happy to apologize for saying this and to say, hey, I was wrong. But sometimes there's a time to call it. The game is over. You know, enjoy your life on the sidelines, gravitate with a few other players and have your weekend games, enjoy each other's company in Sabbath schools, start something different, whatever you want to do. But this grasping of the gospel that Des Ford spoke of, where he had a beautiful way, didn't he, of blending in Ellen White, blending in the sanctuary, shifting things, jettisoning ideas. But as Kurt said earlier, it's because when you embrace the pure gospel, you have to let go of so many direct salvational teachings in the SDA system. They aren't compatible. So if you feel like you're going to bring in change and breathe in a new thing that's going to just take over the church, it's not the populist view. It never has been the populist view, and anyone that tries to do it gets squashed. Andy Mack writes, yes, I went to an Adventist meeting and someone asked, how do you tell someone Adventism is on its deathbed? And the gospel was never mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Those watching, I'm interested
let me
in
give you an illustration about this. You know, here in Houston, where I live, about this situation that doesn't change for better. You know, I listen to a certain Christian radio station often. There are at least 5 that I can pick up. But this is more kind of fitting my age, you know, when it comes to music and all of this. So they would come daily with the announcements about the Christian events across the city, you know. I would know, without the name of the church being mentioned, always when the announcement is being made and the event is organized by the Adventist Church. There is something in a phraseology, the way that things are being phrased and presented, and especially if it is an event that has to do with prophecies, you know. I would always know something that gives it away. And one of the things that gives it away is always, they hardly ever put the complete name of the church that is organizing it. And I don't think that this is done by the policies of the radio station. I think it's done deliberately by the church. So they would either say it's going to happen in the SDA church there and there, or in the community center there and there and there. And when I would go to find their website, lo and behold, I was not wrong. And in one of those churches, I will not name it, it's around Houston, there is unveiling of prophecy, the final call. There is a series of presentation that goes for a full month, about 25 of them. And let me just share some of the titles, okay? Some of the titles. Daniel's prophetic rock. Okay, that's moderate. Revelation's great law. The sanctuary. the 2,300-year prophecy, the beast of Revelation 13, America in prophecy, the mark and the seal, Revelation's final church, proving the prophets. Okay, I have just shared a gist of
A few. Yeah.
Listen, they could have done it 30 years ago under the same titles, and they did.
Yes, that's right.
And sometimes I wonder, and probably it happens with some more advanced pastors, but overall, when it comes to evangelism, Adventist Church comes with the same mantras in evangelism again and again and again. And basically, everything leads to finally prove to those who are coming to visit that this church is the right church.
Yeah.
Okay, this is just an illustration.
No, I like it. I love it. I'm enjoying the conversation very much. Raymond Smith writes, "Stop it, Peter. The SDA Church is alive and well." I think the SDA Church is alive and well, but the gospel within the SDA Church isn't alive and well. And then people will write to me and say, "Oh, it is. I understand the gospel." Yeah, you and 3 other people. Collectively, it doesn't grasp the gospel. Can we chat a little bit about oh, hang on, let's just bring this one. Rochelle writes, "The last Adventist sermon I listened to a few years ago was called Without a Mediator. The entire sermon was paraphrasing Ellen White, LGT, and the pastor didn't use a single Bible verse." So can we go back to your thoughts on Bruinsma? And I'll just ask, we made some notes, some bullet points before we had the program, and I'll just read it out because I think it was phrased in a way that was good. Has the SDA Church, we've covered some of this just now, but I'm just going to read it out as we kind of formulated it. Has the SDA Church changed over the many decades? I think we've just said that no. And in what ways has it? I think we're kind of saying it hasn't. In what ways it hasn't? Perhaps we can look at that. Where does this Dr. Rainer Bruinsma's recent presentation fit into the questions of change that we've just been chatting about?
There is a level at which the Adventist Church has changed. It would not have survived up to now if it hadn't changed at all. So I really respect Dr. Bruinsma, and I think that he's saying some things that probably the others would not. And he can afford it also. He's a retired man now. So I don't have anything against what he was sharing as far as it goes and what the purpose of actually this meeting was. And basically it is about building good relationships between Catholics and Adventists, which is too much for many Adventists anyway, and which prove that, the proof we can find in this, that basically he could not have this meeting at Loma Linda proper, but it had to be some other facility utilized. So there is a level at which I very much respect what he did and what he shared. And I accept also that Catholic Church and the Adventist Church have changed. But the question is, in what areas have they changed?
Yeah.
And Catholic Church has changed. It has really a facelift has been made. This church, Catholic Church, is not necessarily exactly the same as it was when I was a kid, for example. It's different still in some more conservative countries. For example, here, many Catholics in America look more like mainstream Protestants. Very often you wouldn't even know that they're Catholics. And I was surprised when I moved to this country here, and then I would tune to a Catholic radio station, and you listen for a while, and you wouldn't know that it was a Catholic. I thought it was probably Lutheran or Church of England or something like this. So the churches are changing. I would say overall, many churches are changing. They have to go to a certain degree with the times. The question comes this: has anything essential changed that defines the core beliefs, whether Adventist church or Catholic church or any other that is changing? You know, I know only one little church that made a radical change toward the gospel, and it did cost them dearly. The Worldwide Church of God, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
It did cost them that, and if Adventist church would change like this, it would cost Adventist church.
It would cost, yes.
It would. In the same way, doesn't matter that Adventist churches of a much bigger size. So the question is, has the content that really requires changed for better? And I'm not convinced that it has. And I think even what we have been discussed up to this moment demonstrate that really what needs to be changing, things that would come closer to the gospel and allow space for the gospel of Christ to shine and then inform everything else what the denomination believes. Those things have not changed. They've been just polished, gently, sugar-coated.
Yes. Sugar-coated, beautified, or even watered down.
Yeah.
So as to not appear as harsh.
Yeah.
When you read the 28 fundamentals now, well, you've got to dig deep to find out some of the true Adventist teaching. Sorry, what was that?
I didn't want to go further. I just made the copies from describing 3 fundamental beliefs: the remnant and its mission, for example. 18, the gift of prophecy, and belief 24, Christ's ministry in the heavenly sanctuary. Of course, this is written in a different language than if you would find the statements describing the same things printed 100 years ago. But in essence,
yes,
nothing has changed.
Exactly.
It's just
they've just gotten better at
messing
PR.
around even more, playing with the words so that you're even more confused that you don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. They've just gotten better at their propaganda. You know, we're going to have a short break, and I want to come back and ask you a big question. Don't answer it now, but I want to ask you: is the Adventist Church a cult? And we'll talk about that. And I want to talk a little bit about a lot of the gospel Adventists go, oh, well, Ellen White didn't claim she was a prophet. She was just a messenger. She was just a lesser light. I don't even preach her from my pulpit. The reality is, and I mean, this is what I want to come back talking about your views on this, but she wrote herself in Testimonies for the Church, and I've got the reference if people want it. In ancient times, God spoke to men by the mouth of prophets and apostles. In these days, he speaks to them by the testimonies of his Spirit. There was never a time when God instructed his people more earnestly than he instructs them now concerning his will and the course that he would have them pursue. So when you can try and minimize Ellen White, her very clear statements are that no, her words are a direct God speaking to his people. There has never been a time when God instructed his people more earnestly than he instructs them now. So for people to say, hey, look, you know, she's not a big deal for me, I put her in the back seat, like you did yourself, you didn't present her in the sermons. The reality is, if you're wanting to bring in a Des Ford style gospel gem of Adventism, you're always going to be confronted with this authoritative, powerful Ellen White that has got a stranglehold on the church. And like you said, with the Worldwide Church, is that what it's called?
The Worldwide Church of God.
The Populist view was
it changed the name, but this is what it was called.
It was, yeah. The Populist view was, let's change. And it caused all sorts of problems. Adventism is not going to change because the Populist view, the leadership has always, like it's come out, I use the example of a rubber band on a tree rather than a pendulum. People push out, and they snap back. That model has not changed for 180 years. I think there's going to be a time when people have to just say, look, okay, there's no hope for that kind of Adventism to flourish within the Adventist church. I use the word flourish. Yeah, it might be there in pockets, but it can't flourish. So we're going to come back and talk about your view on that and Ellen White's involvement. Can it be watered down? And I want to talk about if it's a cult or not. Thank you, everyone that is watching. Just a quick plug tomorrow. Bill Fritz is on, and then we've got a gospel message. Someone wrote to me the other day, Tihomir. They said, once I've worked through all this stuff that you've been talking about, I still want to hang out at SDAQ&A, but only on the gospel message program. And that's great. That's fine. So thank you, everyone. Don't forget, if you'd like to support my work here, you can scan that code and look. If you feel like you're getting a couple of dollars worth of content here today that's been valuable to you, that you've enjoyed, I'd just love if you could shoot me a couple of dollars, and that means that I can continue on with the program. I'm spending about 10 hours a week on SDAQ&A, and I love every minute of it. But if people wanted to help there with a few dollars, that would be wonderful. So my very special guest today is Tihomir Kukolja. I might be close with that pronunciation, and great to have him. We'll be back very soon. Hello and welcome back to SDA Q&A at the second part of today's conversation. And we're going to talk about some of the themes that we've been expanding on in the first part. And my guest is Tihomir Kukolja. Still not getting it exactly right. I can feel it, but I feel like I'm getting closer. And we've been having a very interesting conversation. I'm going to be sending some links through to some of Tihomir's work. And I'll also, Tihomir, if you're okay, I'll add them into the description as well and into the comments so people can literally click on them and be taken. If I bring them on the screen, it's too hard for people to see and type. So we'll do that. So just before the break, I threw a couple of big ones out there. Perhaps just begin with this idea of Ellen White's authority within the Adventist Church, and yet everywhere within her testimonies and the writings of Ellen White and the leadership source materials, she is placed on a fairly high pedestal with having authority, and yet Gospel Adventists say, and look, good on them. Let's put her in the back seat. Let's not mention her at all. But how did you personally find that? You were a Gospel Adventist. How did you personally find that notion of blending this Gospel Adventism, the more Des Ford style, with the notion that you weren't really allowed to, that you couldn't really talk about Ellen White in that equation? So let's chat about that first, and then we'll answer the other question: is Adventism a cult? So the first one, authority of Ellen White.
All right, okay. Before I say this, I would just like to suggest that before we finish today, if we take a little bit of time, I would like at some point, maybe towards the end, like to share a little bit of my journey after my divorce, since I became the leader of interdenominational, non-denominational, and international organization that would gather people, and my team was made also people from different denominations. What has this done for me? I think this is very important because it relates very much to what we are discussing right now. But when it comes to the authority of Ellen G. White, this is an area where a game is being played. We know this phrase which says, no, she's not about the Bible. She's pointing to the Bible. She's a lesser light leading to greater light. Right? But the way Ellen G. White is being used actually points that her lesser light is blasting so much light that basically defines the greater light, redefines the greater light.
Yes.
And I could dare say this. Not only that the problem is not only with people who are constantly, they cannot speak without quoting from Ellen G. White. Pastors who believe this is not a good sermon unless they have a 3-4 quotation from Ellen G. White. I'm not talking only about this. I'm talking also about the culture in which many Adventists do not actually read Ellen G. White. Even those who are claiming that she is the prophet of this church and God has a place for her, many of them have stopped reading her long time ago. And they read her at the level of a popular little devotional or something like this, where there is a snippet here, a snippet here. But how is the culture of a dominance of the authority of Ellen G. White being kept present in the church? It's through powerful means of, for example, Sabbath school lessons. For example, if you carefully analyze how the Sabbath school lessons are constructed, they're political, they're strategic, they are never really, for example, now the church goes through studying of the Gospel of John, and recently it was the Gospel of Mark, and I'm already forgotten what was before. But it's always cleverly put there so that things are pushed towards her worldview.
Yeah.
So an average Adventist, if he or she at least studies a little bit of the Sabbath school lesson, and even if she or he is not doing it, but only meets the Sabbath school lesson on Sabbath in the church, a typical teacher of a Sabbath school Adventist church will be intoxicated with the Ellen G. White as delivering a current Sabbath school lesson.
Yeah.
So the whole worldview of Ellen G. White is being pushed into the Sabbath school lessons under the covering of we are studying actually the Bible.
Yeah.
My question is, why the Sabbath school lessons are never organized, given a free ride? If we are studying the Gospel of John, let's go orderly and let this gospel speaks for itself. Why it has to be selected here, there. Now we talk about this subject. Now we talk about this. Now we talk about this. And so a few verses from here, a few verses from there, a few verses from there, additional verses from all over the place in the Bible. And then the Friday section comes, which really soars it, that you really see where the thing is going to.
Yeah.
That's how the Sabbath school lessons are structured.
Yeah.
You
like
know,
a sales funnel to the Ellen White perspective.
So her authority is being politically constantly injected into the church because she is the cement that is meant to keep that organization together.
Yeah.
And I agree with those who say, or pull Ellen G. White out of the system, the church is going to collapse. It would. It would.
Yeah.
But my question is not, is this the concern that we need to have? Or we need to be honest to the gospel.
Yeah.
The Worldwide Church of God dared, after the late Armstrong, what was his name? They were, died. Their prophet.
Was it
I
Armstrong?
mean, you take the Worldwide Church of God, and you get Adventist Church in miniature, their history, and our history.
Yeah.
And when he died, and when his successor, with few other pastors, dared to move away. And they dare to move away towards the gospel.
Yeah.
They made an honest step. And I don't care that Bakioki was trying to interfere, the late Bakioki,
I didn't know that.
And try to kind of keep them in line, and probably thought that this is now a good opportunity to get them into Adventism. They did the right thing.
Yeah.
They wanted to be faithful to the gospel rather than to continue living in their cult. It did cost them.
They're very tiny now.
They are very tiny. They split into 2, 3, 4 or 5 groups.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the evangelical group is a small group.
Yeah.
But the question comes, what is more important, to preserve system and organization, even though it doesn't stand for the gospel?
Yeah.
In what way then the other church is different from Catholics, that we are blaming that they don't have the truth and that they're full of tradition of this and this? These are some of the questions to think about. Her authority is deciding authority when it comes to the Adventist church. Everything revolves around her. If not oppressively always, but subliminally, it's there for sure.
100%. I love what you've said there. And I think it's worth being honorable and truthful, regardless of the cost of money or numbers. Yeah. No, well said. Thank you. Do you think it's necessary to make a public statement if someone is leaving? Like, we're talking about two things here. One is an organizational, systemic, a group of people networking and trying to bring about change. But for those that individually leave, I made a public statement. I don't think it's something everyone has to do. What are your thoughts on that?
I think every person needs to decide when it comes to this question for himself or for herself. I personally do not think that this needs to be a rule for everyone. For example, although I am worshiping and I am a part of the Presbyterian church, pretty healthy when it comes to the gospel, because my wife is there, my son is there, because this church stood behind me in my ministry for 20 years, because we live here, and I felt that should be the place where I should be worshiping. And also I am serving in some capacity. I'm like a Bible teacher in one of the Bible classes. This is a big, for Presbyterians, this is a mega church, 4,000 members, okay?
Wow.
And although I am serving here and I found this to be my spiritual home at this time, I cannot say for myself that I have really exited completely.
Oh.
Because I never made a public announcement. I never wanted to be a revolutionary. I never wanted to politicize about this. My life took me gently into completely different. And as far as I'm concerned, I wanted to stay a friend with many of those people.
Yeah.
But I have a very clear view where I'm standing and what I'm believing, So someone might call you as sitting on two chairs. I wouldn't say it like this, because I've developed a different view of belonging to the church, I don't know. I wouldn't recommend that everyone needs to make a statement. I have a Baptist friend from Serbia when I started leading this international project, and he says, why don't you come out publicly and you say that you're leaving the Adventist church? My answer to him was, why do you think I need to do this? Because as far as the gospel is concerned, it's not you who open my eyes to the gospel. I don't want you be your case in your hands bragging about liberating me from.
Have you quietly taken your name off the books?
I don't think. I think I'm still somewhere in the church books. I never requested.
They're using your number when they say they've got millions of people in the church.
Okay, some people said you are not honest, or maybe I have not completely concluded what I want, but that's where I am.
Interesting.
But I know where I am. When I share a little bit about my journey, then I think it will become clear to people. The thing is, and now you all dealt with this, I might sound passionate and, as if I'm hammering. My desire is not to be trashing the Adventist church. I'm those people who know me, they know that I speak passionately, about anything that I speak and consider important. But, I still love those people. I still love those people. I might not agree with many of them, but I still love them. I love to see them when there is opportunity. I just wonder what's going to happen after some of them hear our conversation.
Yeah, you're in trouble now. For those watching that are concerned about that kind of thing, and maybe you are too, I've certainly left publicly, and I've certainly stirred the pot, but I have excellent friendships with current Adventists, and it doesn't end. And those who are being snide and playing the ad hominem attack game on me, well, they're just revealing that they were never a true friend anyway. I just have found that it has made no difference to my connection. Obviously, I'm connected with the Adventist church, but my name's off the roll. I speak against its doctrines and ideologies and the status placed on Ellen White that she probably claimed herself as well. But I can also say she was inspirational, and I can also keep my friends, and I'm making new ones amongst formers. But I've lost nothing from my Adventist connection. And I only say that in encouragement to people that you won't lose anything, other than you will have a very interesting time with personal identity feelings that I did not expect. By officially taking my name off, that had more of an impact on me when it happened a few months after my public leaving. The public leaving was emotional and, had that component to it, but there have been no long-term ramifications as far as friendships and connections, and I can converse with Adventists or not. It hasn't changed that. But when I took my name off officially and the letter came through, I did struggle with a sense of identity. And that's something we covered a little bit earlier. But apart from that, I just want to, I mean, you've come so far out without officially taking your name off. You've got a whole, you know who you are now anyway. It's not going to affect you at all. You could say, hey, you could say on the program right now, I'm officially leaving the Adventist Church, going to take my name off the rolls tomorrow. And you've already gone so far with building up who you are and knowing who you are and maintaining connections with people that it's going to make no difference at all for you. But for those who are more had my situation, yeah, expect a little bit of turbulence. But again, no judgment. I'm not saying you should do it at all. Well, let's get into a couple of other questions, and we'll finish with the cult one, the big one. So we've talked a little bit about things within Adventism, and I noticed in the Rein de Berinsma program that he did, where he was forced off campus by Ted Wilson himself, apparently. He, at the end of his talk, he spoke a lot about how we should admit that we've come a long way with our relationships and understandings of, you know, the end times regarding Catholics and Catholicism and the mark of the beast. And that's, I think, why Ted Wilson moved him to said you can't speak here on Adventist soil. But he then went on to talk about the things of Adventism that are good. And for me personally, I thought, well, they were just things like health and, you know, we live longer and, you know, we've got some good cultural connections. We've got hospitals everywhere. I saw them as good things, but I didn't take them as being, I was kind of, well, so what? If you're talking about a special, unique remnant church that has a last days message for the world, you don't want to say, well, the big things we're bringing to the table are health and hospitals. They're great things, but they're not unique remnant offerings to the world. So sometimes when Adventists say what the good things are within Adventism, they just say good things about what humanity does and what thousands of other churches and movements are doing. You could leave Adventism and still have a health message. In fact, many have a better health message. You could still have connection to hospitals, and I'm sure the Mormon Church has massive hospital connections all around the world. And I'm just saying it seemed a little bit of a tack on. Oh, and by the way, there's good things. But to you, I want to ask you the question, are there good things in Adventism, and what are they?
I mean, there are some things that are good, but I think you have described well what is actually going on. There is a difference between good things and those crucial things that make a difference when it comes to the gospel.
Exactly.
So there are good things. And it was probably true that at some point in the history of the Church was an avant-garde in some areas, and the others picked up and are probably doing even a better job now when it comes to alternative health methods. We cannot deny this, that you know, however Kellogg's and the others were crazy, but there was something advanced in their approach at a time when they were working, you know. But today, that's not the story of the Adventist Church, because there are many others.
Yes.
There is a benefit from a focus on a healthy living for our own sake. You know, for our own sake. There is Desmond Ford, to the best of my knowledge, he was never preaching a health reform, but when you looked at this man, you knew that he was living according to it. Okay.
Yeah.
You know.
Very
but
much.
He was never turning it into gospel. The problem is that whatever advantage the Adventist Church had with the health reform, the moment it turned it into religion that gives you certain spiritual advances, it has ruined the gospel. The things have been destroyed.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to say, for me as a follower of Jesus, who lives according to the Holy Spirit, it is wise to live like this.
Yeah.
It's another thing to turn this and start philosophizing and creating it into another kind of new age or whatever, and basically saying, oh, if you don't eat this and this and this and this and this, then your brain is going to work better, and the Holy Spirit will be able to operate in you better than the others. You will be able to think more clearly, and therefore, you know, the Spirit of the Lord will be living in you in a more advanced way than with those poor people who are obese and I don't know, living whatever. Well, the gospel clearly said that's not a criteria by which anything what has to do with salvation is being decided. Schools, true. You go to Papua New Guinea and some of those islands, those denominations that have schools are ruling in those countries because they have prime ministers, they have leaders, because they were early there with their school system and no one else had the schools. In some cases, this is an Adventist church along with the Anglican church and Catholics and the others. So there is nothing specifically, when you are watching those ministry videos in the Adventist church, how wonderfully the message goes forward. I see the similar videos in the Presbyterian church, similar videos about their work, medical work. Yes, maybe before, but there are medical system in this country in America that are probably much bigger than the Adventists. For example, in Texas here, where I'm Methodist network of hospitals, I'm sure bigger and more powerful than the Adventist one. This is not what decides the uniqueness of the mission of the church. The other extreme is when church says that it has some specific truth, message to give to others that others do not have, it actually gives a slap to the gospel, because gospel doesn't operate like this. Exactly. It doesn't operate as Gnosticism, in which we have some secret knowledge that no one else has.
Yeah.
And we are giving this to you, like this serial of those 25, you can know what they're going to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, it seems like they haven't read any of Paul's writings on this topic.
Yeah. So I will say it very radically. Unless the church is focused on the gospel of Christ, which in a simple way is summarized, that everything that we need is summarized in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Jesus, who did all of this once and for all of us. Unless this is the center of the teaching of the church, then shapes everything, and sanctification and activism of the church has really nothing to offer. Wow. Whether it's Adventist church or whether it's, I don't know, some Dominionist church or some Christian nationalism church, or I don't know what. If the Christ and the gospel is misunderstood and it's not in the middle, such a church has nothing to offer, and it's arrogance to claim to have a special status.
Exactly.
And although the Adventism today doesn't speak the same language like before, that no one else is going to be saved, now Adventists have become more generous and say, yes, there are people who are not Adventists who will be, as if permission depends on us,
Yeah, I know, exactly.
As if we are to decide how many of the others, Baptists, Pentecostals, will enter the kingdom of God. Almost like, look at how kind we are. We are letting more people to come in. This has nothing to do like this. Kingdom of God doesn't operate on the basis of those kind of understandings.
That's pious, high moral ground talk. We're going to wrap up in a minute. I just want to bring up, Angela has said, my name is off the books, and the only book I want my name on is the Book of Life. Rochelle has asked, in just getting some information, so I'm happy to tell you, Rochelle, you get a letter when you take your name off, or an email. Would love to hear how the process works. I want to take my name off, but I don't want that read publicly in front of my hometown for family's sake. You can do it without getting any public mention. You just write to your church, and if you don't know exactly what it is, you ring your conference and say, where is my name held? And then you contact the secretary of your local church where you are a member, and you just say, hey, I've decided to take my name off the roll. I no longer want to be a Seventh-day Adventist for personal reasons, if you don't want to go into it. I will not be changing my mind. You need to say that, or they'll get back and forth, try to have some Bible studies with you. Just say, I will not be changing my mind. I want it raised at the next board meeting or business meeting, whatever the one it is, the next appropriate meeting, and I do not want it discussed outside of that meeting. And then please confirm via letter or email that you have actually actioned my request. And then you'll usually get a nice letter or email that says, hey, no worries, thank you so much, all the best, and it's done. and it's not public, and it's be prepared for some like, whoa, you know, you're going to feel some stuff. But I was fifth generation, so I've ended a long connection. So there was lots of reasons why I should have stayed, but I'm just so glad I did. And it's so hard to explain to people, I'm glad I did, but I'm not saying people should do it. I'm saying use your brain, use your own thoughts, your own processes, your own discovery, and then, you know, draw your own conclusions. That's my big point. That's my whole point. I want to just ask you, there's something that you raised actually when we were chatting off air, and I'll kind of rephrase it as a question. Why does the SDA Church appear as if it does not need or want anyone else but itself? It wants to be an independent entity within Christendom. To what extent is such independence possible or impossible?
Okay. And don't forget, before we finish, to give me 5 minutes to tell about my
Yes,
journey, because it is directly related.
100%.
Yeah.
That's slated
Yeah.
in.
Don't you have this kind of feeling that the Adventist Church is like a kingdom within a kingdom, like a country within a country? You often have this kind of situations like, for example, in America, I live in Texas, and you have a feeling that Texas is something, it's part of the United States of America, but at the same time, it's something else, you know. We had in the former Yugoslavia, we had 6 republics, and Slovenia was always something else. We said it was a country within a country because it acted as if it wasn't part of Yugoslavia, but it was just needs itself, for example. This is a problem because in so many aspects, when you look at the Adventist Church superficially, it doesn't look much different than many other Protestant evangelical denominations. And you can, by accident, visit maybe church service once or twice in some of the places, and you would say there is much difference than just people meeting on Saturday, for example. But at the same time, there is this attitude that radiates, I would say, from within the Adventist Church. We are self-sufficient. We don't need Christian brothers and sisters, any one of you. We don't need. We can handle it by ourselves. We know the best. But at the same time, the same church is using all possible resources that belong to the general pool of what Christendom is offering. One illustration, for example. My good mother, who was leading church choirs or whatever, you know, she probably died believing that 98% of the songs in our church hymnal were written by Adventists, for example. And when she would hear on the radio or somewhere else a gospel song that we would sing in the church, she would say, "Look they're singing our songs. They're singing our
Not
hymns."
realizing it's the other way around.
They'll realize that it's the other way around. This is a simple way of explaining this kind of sense of superiority that we just need ourselves. We don't need anyone else.
Yeah.
That has been my feeling. And the reason why is this? So I think we have explained this through our conversation. The sense of superiority, we have certain knowledge that others do not have. We have a message that do not others have. We have a rebranded gospel, which is called Three Angels Messages. We you know, it's us, and us, and us. You know, when I started leading the program, this international for young leaders about reconciliation and leadership, which is based on historic Christian teachings, we were teaching our team that we are not to talk about us, even use the name of our program constantly as if it is the pillar of everything. We need to be as much as possible about the person of Jesus. And that's what Christianity is all about.
Yeah,
what it should be all about.
When you ask Adventists about that, they use that as a bit of a, let's redirect all these questions. Hey, I just want you to focus on Jesus. My focus is Jesus. And they just instantly kind of end the conversation, because I feel like they're not addressing all the things that make the water around Jesus murky. So
the problem is,
how do you clarify the difference there?
But the difference is this, what you told before: confusion between the truth as a concept and the person of Jesus. Because many Adventists believe that the concepts they believe equals Jesus. I would argue that more often you are going to hear a genuine conversation about Jesus and our walk with Jesus and experience Jesus in the Christian circles outside of Adventism than within the Adventism. I would argue that it is not natural for most Adventists to talk about Jesus, except in a political way.
Yeah, except when they're weaponizing it to stop asking me hard questions.
Yeah. For example, this program in Houston, I'm sure that those people believe that all of it is about Jesus.
Yeah.
But it is not. It is about getting people into the church.
Exactly.
And this is not one and the same thing.
Yeah. That's why I was surprised how well my commentary or observational program was, where the 7 questions that Adventist pastors won't answer in public. It's because they're part of a machine, and if they start answering these questions, they'll affect the almost pyramid marketing style nature of the Adventist church. You can't speak off script. I just want to address one comment, and then we'll talk about the cult thing, and then I want to hand it over to you to just give us some closing thoughts. MC writes, and MC is going to be on the program next week too. I think 29th USA time, 30th our time. And I think we've got Mike Colburn coming back doing a part 2 on soul sleep next week as well. So keep an ear out for that. This is important. I just wanted to address this. It's a little side topic that's kind of come up tonight. Regarding exiting, it kind of depends on your local pastor's understanding of the church manual. I had to go before the church business meeting a couple of times before they voted that I could leave. He adds, the first time they voted against me leaving. So I just want to highlight that should never happen. If that is happening, you get to leave the church on your terms. I wrote back to him in the conversations, that's terrible. That's manipulation. You don't have to do that. You can leave on your terms regardless of the manual. You experienced spiritual abuse right there. So you are very within your rights to say, I don't want it to be voted on. I am leaving. I've made up my mind. There is no coming back. You just need to accept it. You can say that very clearly, and they must acquiesce to your way of leaving. So he adds, I think some people were thought that they were voting me to hell if they voted me out. Yeah. So just tell them, don't vote on it. I'm leaving. Just accept it. So yeah, sorry you went through that, and that you can claim your way of leaving. Okay, the last question, and then handing it over to you. It's my daughter's 12th birthday today, Tihomir. So we'll wrap this up in about 15 minutes. But I wanted you to talk for 5 minutes on, if the SDA Church is a cult, how much this might be true for many other Protestant evangelical churches that brag about their mainstream Reformed Bible believing character or pedigree. So we're not really saying, is it a cult, but we're nestling it in the notion of, can it be considered a cult? If it is, what then? Share with us your thoughts on that.
Who is it a cult or not? I can be political and say, like now the conversations about, the war in Israel, Palestine. Is Israel committing genocide? And when people who are afraid to say that they are committing, then they're saying they are leaning towards possibility of committing genocide. So the church leans towards the possibility of being a cult. Okay.
Interesting. Good. Yeah. Interesting.
There are differences between the Adventism and Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, for example, I would say in the gradation of how much each one of them is a cult.
Right.
So I would have certain grace for the Adventist Church saying, I don't want to compare them with Jehovah's Witnesses, and I don't want to compare with the Mormons. But does the Adventist Church have a very strong cultic mentality? It does have. And as long as Ellen G. White is venerated in the church, it will have.
Yeah.
As long as the lesser light blasts so powerfully that it overshadows the bigger light, it will be a cult by necessity. By, I'm sorry to say, this. Maybe not in a way that we see other extreme organizations.
Yeah.
I share with you, I don't know whether this directly went to the chat or not. I have no idea. I shared with you the links of some articles, and I have 2 articles that I've written about the Branch Davidians in Waco.
Yes. Now I've put all the links.
Those articles are, if not directly, but I would say subliminally enough to be understood, addressing that question.
Yes,
because
I've put all the links to those in the comments, by the way.
In the second one, I'm trying to address the question that although Branch Davidians and what happened in 1993 in Waco, Adventists could not be blamed for this.
Yes.
But the apple doesn't fall far away from its tree.
Oh, so you got to say that again. Say that again. That's such a good comment. Just repeat that
comment. The cultic nature of this movement that went to radical extremes that was picked up from the historic Adventism.
Yeah.
So I would, if you can read this. My first article gives a story of a friend from Newell who simply transited from being an Adventist, whatever, in a matter of few weeks. He was completely in, and he was one of those who died in the fire. And I was describing him and my conversations with him, which anyone who, anyone can see where I was aiming with this article, what I was trying to explain, and that the second article deals more openly with Branch Davidians and their pickup of the theology of inspiration from the traditional Adventism and then giving it a radical spin.
Yeah. Yes.
So I don't know how I answered that question.
No, you've answered that so well. I wanted you to repeat that line about, the apple not falling far from the tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
may not be a cult, but it leans towards it, and the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yeah.
And Andy Mack writes, because I asked her once when I interviewed her about this, and she said, well, if it's not a cult, it's certainly a high demand religion.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you've answered that very well.
It is not cult in a sense that, you have other groups which are really so controlling into your private life. You can still be Adventist. You can live a very comfortable life without being interfered with, as long as you are not, opposing too much or whatever. So there are differences still, but the elements are there.
Yeah, there's differences and they're subtle. But that recent Bruinsma, Des Ford's memorial, Christopher Mindanao not being able to discuss what he thinks the seal of God is and the Sunday law. And that's why I've done this challenge. If you're watching and you're an ordained SDA pastor, go on any show or come on this show and actually answer those 7 questions. And I bet no one does, because they're too scared. And that, to me, says everything about this. That, to me, says the tree is leaning very closely to a cult. And when the apples fall, they land very close to that tree. That's a pretty big thing to say, isn't it? That's a big thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
Tihomir Kukolja, I want to just thank you for sharing today. I've put all your links in the comments on YouTube, in the comments in Facebook group. I'm already cannot wait to go and start clicking on them and reading myself. I want you to share a little bit in closing with us, a bit more of your journey. And I want to thank you for being on the program today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
It has been a pleasure.
It's been great. We've had a really wonderful audience.
I'll see how much it will cost me.
Have nothing to fear.
No, I'm not.
Nothing to fear.
I'm not. I've been around for long enough.
Exactly.
Okay, I want this to be my final thoughts, and I'm just going to give a few illustrations. The gospel is not a tribalism. Kingdom of God is not determined by the borderlines of denominations. Adventism throughout history wanted us to believe that basically kingdom of God equals the last church, okay? Kingdom of God does not operate like this. And even the statement, which one is this, of the Adventist Church, statement 13, the remnant and its mission starts well, but then it pollutes everything. The universal church is composed of all who truly believe in Christ. There should be a full stop there. But there comes a but, which then ruins everything. But in the last days, and then comes the story after that. No, the universal church is composed of all who truly believe in Jesus. I do not even think that Jesus, when he came and lived here and when he was going back to the Father, that he really was envisaging, he knew through his wisdom and being, but that's what he really wanted, that he has such a tribalism suddenly emerging with all kinds of claims and all kinds of groups and all kinds of competing, which one is more faithful, which one has more or less truth. Some churches lead in that so aggressively, others are more subtle. But, but even in the Presbyterian church I'm attending, I could hear this, we Presbyterians this, we Presbyterians that, we Presbyterians this. I could hear this, although it's not so aggressively present as it is in Adventism. In my work over the last 20, 25 years, when I was practically plunged in an environment to lead a movement of young people from many countries, in my leading of this, we had young leaders, young people coming from over 60 countries, and we are talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of the young people. This project was it was designed after the wars that we had in the former Yugoslavia, and deliberately designed to bring the people, young people, leadership material who genuinely represent the region, ethnically, politically, and religious-wise. So we would deliberately bring friends and enemies to be together in a situation where they had to live together. And it was a place where we had everything that, for example, our region there had. And not only our region, because it became very international, it was in English, also because of that. And, there were Catholics, Orthodox, because they're the majority. There were Muslims always with us. They always, not because they want, but because when you have 10 Muslims in a group of 70, believe me, you will be thinking, how do you project the gospel in a friendly, be truthful, but in a friendly manner. And then there will be others. There will be Baptists, Pentecostals of all colors, occasionally some Adventists, there will be agnostics, there will be atheists, living together and learning on the premises of the person of Jesus, not denominational, but letting the gospel speak to those people. And when you work with the issues of reconciliation, believe me, gospels are full of this. Samaritan woman, for example, you can make them into contemporary stories. But my point is this: for me, this was the shaping history, because I could lead this project only if I myself was true to the vision of this project. As a traditional Adventist, I could not be true to this project.
Right.
No way. I had to be outside of the parameters of Adventism to be able to be one of them, to accept them, and to approach them as brother and sister. I learned that very quickly, and I had no problem with this. So 20 years of working like this did shape me, because you have to ask yourself questions that maybe you postponed to be answering before. And this is, how do I live my Christian faith honestly in this kind of setup without prostituting it? And I found it that it's not easy. It's not easy. That just if you believe in Jesus, that he did for you what he did, that this leads you into sanctification where you are opening yourself and embracing others. And that in the words of Jesus on the cross, who was saying, in the words of Jesus, who was saying on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they are not knowing. I take this as a symbolic picture of Jesus on the cross with his outstretched hands, hugging, embracing the entire humanity. And that he is calling us to do the same. And that these are the works to which he's calling us to do. Not to quarrel about how do you keep Sabbath or do you not keep Sabbath, or over what you eat or what you don't eat, and these kind of things. That these are the works that matters. Relational things. How do you love your brother who's completely different? This is maybe the hardest lesson I had to learn, but I enjoyed it. And the other thing very quickly is this. My work brought me to be guest in a number of churches. I've come to the place where I could feel at home in each one of them. In each one of them. I was preaching in a number of churches. I was not preaching as an Adventist. I was preaching as a fellow brother who wanted to kind of deliver Jesus a little bit closer to those people. And this is what I wanted to share at the end, that gospel is not a tribalism.
Oh, that's good.
God doesn't have his more favorite and less favorite tribes on this earth. And then the most favorite one that has the gospel formulated in three angels' messages, or I don't know how we call it. We are all brothers and sisters, and the gospel is one, and it's very simple. Jesus died for you. Embrace him, and in the name of that Jesus, embrace others. That's my...
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the program. It's been a tremendous interview, and I love that you've said that last little bit there. The gospel message is not a tribal message. It's bigger than that. It is the biggest of big tents. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Tihomir Kukolja, everybody. All the links are there, and can't wait to catch you guys tomorrow. I'm racing out the door to Renee's 12th birthday party. Got to be there in 2 minutes.
Okay, bless you all.
See you later. Thank you so much. Brilliant.